All right, here we are with Jonathan Stalls of Pedestrian Dignity, Intrinsic Pass. Very happy to be here with you, to call you a friend, to be learning from you, and yeah, just today to sit down and talk a bit about all the things you're up to and talk a bit about pedestrian dignity movement, your book, the walk-in rules. Let's just get into it. Yeah.
Gosh, love it. Good to be here with you, friend, colleague, co-creator. Um, wow, yeah, there's so many things.
There are so
So
many things.
I
Yeah,
think,
there's
there are so many things. I consider myself a walking, I kind of call it a walking artist, which I know you and I connect on a lot, Annika, and um but I've always been an artist ever since I was young. It was my main escape, but also my main creative, constantly creating worlds as a kid and piles of sketchbooks and moving through the world. I moved every 2 years when I was young. And I was constantly shuttled in an automobile, from place to place. I love Rebecca Solnit's words in her book, Wanderlust, A History of Walking. She talks about going from one interior to the next. And that was my upbringing, most of it. And kind of face plastered on next to the windshield of a car. And so the sketchbooks were such a release anyway. The artist was forming, and yeah, into my, fast forward many, many years, but just, I spent 8.5 months walking across the country in 2010, which really opened my eyes to both the benefits, and also the harm of moving the way we're made to. It was a transformative experience on every level. And just it was a 242-day training around the gaps and barriers and just the lived reality of being a pedestrian through so many different towns and cities and landscapes. And so with all of that, it was, I finished that walk in 2010, and I really, really cared a lot about, um, how can I just be creative as a creative person to invite more people to move the way they're made to in community, for connection, for health. And then on the other side of that, getting creative around how do I just be emergent, and how do I play and experiment with, like, this is what's happening out here for people that have no choice but to be walking, which is my primarily lived experience, but also witnessing and moving alongside people on powered scooters and wheelchairs. And just how can I just be a creative advocate for that kind of lived harm, the hostility of a lot of the car centric built environments, and the impact of that. Anyway, I'm giving a lot of background story, but that is essentially what's bridged into my work with. So Intrinsic Paths is kind of like my creative kind of mixed. It's my art business. It's my kind of working studio playground. I do pen and ink artwork. I do art markets. I finished a book last year. It comes out in August, called Walk, all in capital letters. Slow down, wake up, and connect at 1 to 3 miles an hour. And because I'm such an embodied person, a lived experience person, it's full of practices and stories and art and just all kinds of things. And Pedestrian Dignity is this blossoming experiment around just raw, unfiltered. I like to use the word impact. Like, it's an impact storytelling framework for the dignity, the lived. This is what I experience in this moment today, trying to get to the grocery store, waiting at the bus stop that doesn't have a shelter, slipping in the mud in the rain, trying to get home. Kind of these, just practicing around how to tell stories from the vantage point of the pedestrian, and using media tools for that. And it's a long answer to your question. But
Well,
that's
I got a lot of good notes from that. Yeah, that's great. I learned some things there too about you. Well, first of all, I want to go back to the walk. So what inspired that 8.5 month walk? Like what were you setting
yeah.
out? Was it a, because it wasn't to, the inspiration wasn't necessarily to find the gaps and barriers. That's kind of what came
Yeah,
out of it, right?
totally. Yeah. Yeah, so there's so many stories that are in the book related to like different experiences I had along that journey that kind of like point and highlight so it's just fun to like think about, gosh, this book is going to be out in August, and I just like, it's just fun to think about. But I would say the primary reason was just my own personal kind of recalibrating. I was going through a really, really hard, uh, in some ways dark and heavy personal stage in my life. Um, I was facing some hard things internally, and I didn't really feel like I belonged in any setting. I wasn't feeling home in the school, like the college work that I was doing. I didn't really know what to do in career internally. I was like coming out. I'm queer LGBTQ, so that was really heavy and difficult for me because of the circumstances I was in. And I think because I moved every 2 years, my sense of home, my sense of ground was just kind of warped in so many other ways. And so all of that stacking, I was like, I need an experience. Um, or I craved an experience. I didn't even know what it would be. I was thinking about serving overseas or doing some different things that would just take me out of. But I stumbled across, there's a book called Walk Across America by Peter Jenkins. Stumbled on it in the library at my community college. And it was 20 cents, and it was sitting there staring at me right as I walked into the library, and grabbed it, sat and read it in 2 days, canceled all my classes, was crying and shaking. And I was having such a reaction to this book and to this author who had chosen to do a walk like that for some similar reasons. And it was just clear that I needed to just go. I'd never had any long distance hiking experience prior to that. So it was truly diving into the unknown. And some friends dropped me off on March 1st on the Atlantic Ocean, said, good luck.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that's how it started. Yeah.
Wow. Okay. So the book shares a bit about that, right?
It does. It shares,
Walk.
yeah, it does share quite a bit about that, like lots of little stories and moments. And there's a great UFO story in there, y'all.
Oh, really? Okay. This is my interest. You already know I'm going to get the book, but that piques my interest
I
further.
just had to say it. I had to say it.
Okay.
All right.
So also, I know that you're planning a real interesting experience too around the launch. Can you share
Yeah.
about that? Yeah.
Yeah. So I just told myself, because walking has actually, throughout and after that experience, I mean, it's my main form of medicine. It's my main form of practice in terms of kind of cultivating the creativity, but also working out complex projects, like processing complex relationships in my life. I mean, just kind of grounding and letting go of things. I mean, all the reasons. And as my main form of transportation. And so all of that, I told myself as this book was kind of forming, and as I was on the fence of whether or not I would move forward with making it public. I said, either way, like if this happens, when it is released, I want to be out in the world, just away from, as much as possible, away from walls, and at least limit screen time and sedentary. Like I really want to be out moving for days and days and days as this is coming out. So to be close to the practices that are in the book, and to be just riffing in a creative way as people are reading it and experiencing it. So I'm working on developing a route. I really love multi-day, a couple weeks, even a couple months, like multi-day long distance routes, just through neighborhoods and community and cities and different open spaces and I mean, just mixing it all up. So I'm currently creating a route from New York City to Washington, D.C. for about 2 weeks. and then a smaller, maybe 5-day route on the West Coast, maybe around the LA area. This would all be kind of at the end of August or early September timeframe. Yeah.
Hey, super exciting. Well, you're gonna document that and share, right?
Totally. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I like to pretend that I'll be like, yeah, just away from all the screens, but let's be real. I'm gonna be
We're
that
gonna,
smartphone's gonna
of
be like
course.
TikToking and
Yeah, we want to hear all about that, and I think that's
yeah.
a great moment to move into your social media use, because I find your use of social media fascinating, inspiring, sort of informative in terms of um, what you're doing, especially on TikTok. I got on TikTok to follow you, and I know others have too. You inspired people to get on TikTok. So
Yay.
I'd love to hear a little bit about your social media journey. First of all, you have intrinsic paths, of course, on
Mhm.
social media. Your art is exquisite.
Thank
It's
you.
really gorgeous. I love your style. But pedestrian dignity, if you could share a little bit about your social media journey with that, and what you're doing on TikTok, etc.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you, friend. I yeah, so I I really like social media from the standpoint of like bringing people into, again, I kind of use this term of lived experience, or kind of raw, like whether it's poetic or just kind of showcasing moments, or details or scenarios or experiences. So that is just that I really have fun with that. It's like an active, creative branch out of the tree that I love to use and experiment with. So I've been doing that for years and years, especially, I was doing it a lot with the long distance walk in 2010, using the different tools. And so I really enjoy experimenting just in general with social media around that. The TikTok in particular, and I think also how Instagram has evolved for some of what I do with pedestrian dignity specifically, I was very intentional when those were starting. I'm someone that, and I really care about how to filter and weave and be collaborative like that. I'm a collaborative person. I'm not one to like fire shame at individuals or send like, everyone has strategies for organizing work, but for me, I love collaborating and creating collectives and shared learning. And with what I have experienced on everyday roads and streets, where I am fired up. I'm angry about the harm facing pedestrians, like just genuinely angry about it, not like flippantly angry, like kind of like this kind of, the ground is like, this is so unjust for so many reasons. And so I told myself, but it's also like, it feels so good when you're in a safe and comfortable and enjoyable space for pedestrians. So it's not just the anger, it's also like, I can breathe. I can be with other families and kids and abilities and ages and in a place of rest and listen to music and just share in an ecosystem that is human and earth oriented. It's a habitat and not just a car centric transaction. And so both the positive and the negatives that I feel around this are so loud in me. And so I told myself as I was starting Pedestrian Dignity on TikTok and Instagram, I was like, I want to be as raw as I can, imperfect, but just raw. So there was just, I want to be raw. I want to be honest. I want to have these. So I had the strategy that was moving in was I want it to not necessarily be so much on me, but I want it to be facing out into the raw landscapes that can communicate in all the ways that, that I can't, around helping people connect intuitively to the harm and the beauty of these different environments that either support or don't support the pedestrian experience. And so there was that just raw, honest, facing and moving through spaces, but it was also just really targeting younger audiences too. youth, like just being very mindful of like playing with trends, like on TikTok, like playing with different music, things that they're already kind of leaning into, things that are kind of playful and fun for me too, that it's not just overly academic, it's not just overly like data driven, it's more just like this, it's weaving experiential invitation and being very kind of 101 at times about it, like this is what a detached sidewalk is, or this is what an intersection is, but weaving that in a way that's either playful or intense, or just any form of raw as I experiment as an artist. So I'm still learning, I'm still figuring it out, but it's been really affirming, really affirming to have so much engagement from, and not just younger folks, like a lot of people who are using TikTok and Instagram, but just kind of a different way of connecting to how we organize and center and prioritize pedestrian mobility in this time. Yeah.
Yeah, you are seeing a lot of engagement, and I like to say it's a movement. It's really a movement, and you're like at the heart of it. You're seeing that, right? Because a lot of people who are involved in mobility might not necessarily be on TikTok or
Right.
any social media at all, so you don't see this one dimension of engagement, which seems really lit up over on TikTok.
Yeah, it is so much. I think the affirming word is just the right. It's just an affirming, not so much, not, yeah, there's some like, there's the artist who's behind, who's kind of creating the invitations and who's weaving, as Annika, like as you're weaving all these different collectives across the globe, like
Mhm.
there is a weaver, there is somebody who's constantly creating, whether it's in the foreground or the background. And so there is that like this is really beautiful to see people showing up and weaving and kind of responding and engaging with the art in a sense, or the invitation. But I think what's really, really powerful alongside of that is the affirming, shared, intuitive ache for something that isn't car-centric mobility. Like it's just like, and what that is, or what it should be, or what it could be, depending on whoever's engaging on the TikTok or Instagram, it could be all over the place. Like it could be the first time they've been able to put words to it because they see pedestrian dignity and they're like, oh my God, how many years did I have to walk because I got injured and I had to limp or use a wheelchair, or my life is on a wheelchair and this is what I experience, or I've my parents or my neighbor takes the bus every day and I've had to help them in different situations, but I haven't had the terminology. So they're really leaning into the advocacy and or dignity that we deserve something different and better for the first time. Or it's people who maybe have been thinking about these things, but maybe haven't necessarily felt them at the level that they could or should, maybe just spark or push, whether, urgency or just different ways of advocating, not just the community meetings that we have, but how can they get and encourage city, state leaders to be out feeling and experiencing these environments alongside, kind of in solidarity with all that have no choice but to be out there. And so anyway, there's all these different affirmations that come in and alongside, where it's like there's a collective desire for navigating the world differently and having our spaces look and feel different. Yeah.
Yeah, I like how you mentioned how different people come to it. There are people who don't have the language. I remember the other day somebody said, I never heard that word walkability before. That's really
Yeah.
interesting. People are thinking about it. For people like you and me, we're thinking about these issues
Oh my God.
every
Like
day.
out of the womb.
Yeah, pretty much. But for a lot of people, they don't have this language, and nor should people have to
Yeah.
be. Everybody,
Exactly.
I love what you wrote in your recent LinkedIn post with that fantastic Mashable article on you and your work. That was a really, really fantastic. It was Mashable, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Chase did such a great job. Oh my
Yeah,
gosh.
I'll include a link to that when I post this. But I liked what you said in your LinkedIn post, that this is work that shouldn't have to exist. This is
Yeah.
pedestrian advocacy work. It's almost, to me,
Mhm.
so absurd that we are in
Yes.
2022 and
Yes.
there are communities you cannot, like, it's like the fundamental part of a community is being able to walk through it. And we can talk about sustainable urbanism goals, but at the center of this, the basic square one element is walking, being able to
Yeah.
walk through your community. So to me, I can understand your anger, and I'm similarly angry and also just baffled
Yeah.
that this is such and it's getting worse in many cities too.
Yeah.
As I know, cities that were well, all cities were walkable at some point before the advent of the car, but in many places, car dependence is raging on and getting worse. So
Yeah.
it's like, what's happening here? So the world needs all the pedestrian advocates it can get, but it's also simultaneously so frustrating that we have all the data we need about the violence. We really do. I mean, I support ongoing research, of course, but
Yes.
we have all the data we need to know there's a massive problem. We know this is a problem. So this issue with car dependence and car centric planning, as you said. Well, I don't know if you said it, but growing up, you were your family was car dependent, as mine were too. So was there a click when did you just not have a car as you became an adult, or what was the kind of like click around to a more
Yeah.
like walkable lifestyle?
Yeah. You know, I always think about, I mean, so it was when I was on the long walk in 2010,
Okay.
when I was just, and I think that holding the hand of being an artist. So I think, I don't know that these words would apply to all artists, but like, I think as an artist, you're like, you're constantly uncovering or weaving or integrating the times, like the times, the heavy, the hard, the unjust, the positive, the dreams, the hopes, the world as it is and the world as it could be.
Mhm.
Like I think all these, so you're like, at least for me, like I'm just constantly weaving in the times we are in, maybe culturally, socially, but even just like the environment that I'm moving through. And so that that walk was literally, I was constantly ingesting these, just stacked experiences that I was personally having, but also witnessing and moving alongside. I stayed with hundreds of strangers, and I stayed under highway overpasses and in alleys and in ditches with a lot of different people who are just in between or transient or whatever, but like witnessing how human bodies move through where they live, going to school, like how they hang out and rest, and having spent some time in urban areas or places where there are more plazas and just more like not having the car rip through everything. I was comparing that to how those, I had some comparison in my experience around that. And so, yeah, it was that walk that really just having such consistent disruption related to not feeling safe, not feeling seen, feeling a really unnecessary emotion that would rise around embarrassment, isolation, exposure, shame, not not like feeling like I made it, or I worked hard enough, or I didn't like get in line, like just all the things that kind of start to show up when you're an isolated body
Mhm.
at an intersection with 8 lanes of traffic in both directions, and all of them are stopped because you hit the crosswalk. You may not even have enough time to cross the street because the crosswalk is going right, like all that. But like this isolated around homes and grocery stores and bus routes, like to your point, like it was just like, yeah, there's definitely anger underneath a lot of it, but it's just baffled. It's like, wow, like just shock around disconnection, shock around just irresponsibility related to resources, shock around so many things, just shock, a lot of shock. So that shock is what really, like, a lot of that just compounded. Yeah, just made it very loud in my stomach. That
Well,
I, yeah.
I know that feeling. You describe it really well, that being that lone body and having lived in lots of car dependent
Mm.
environments. I know I have those memories of being that lone, that you feel like weird, you're a sad little figure on the side of the road. You know,
Ah,
you should be driving, and this is the truly unjust nature of it all, that there are so many communities that you cannot safely walk through. I mean, it's you
yeah, and
know, and it's absurd.
it is absurd. And then you put that next to income, legal, like just medical, physical, financial, and legal ability to drive, just in general. So even if you could drive, you can't for all those reasons. So the millions of people that just are having to navigate it in other ways, or are overly isolated and disconnected from just public space because
Yeah.
of that. So how many people are left out? And then you have so many people growing in this time, especially younger folks, in ways around and learning and seeing and living the effects of like climate harm, and being steered literally to get their license, to go
Mhm.
like against their beliefs and what they're being taught to change, but to have the systems kind of say, well, the real rite of passage is still getting your driver's license. Your
Mhm.
ID, your identity is paired with your ability capacity to be a driver.
Right.
So the identity around driving is
Yeah.
so deep
Yeah, it's
and
connected
kind
to
of
a machine. You're
you're
proving your
it's
identity.
just like,
I told you we're in a
yeah,
science fiction film, you know.
oh.
But what you
And
said
this
of
is,
go
yeah.
ahead.
Oh no, go ahead. No, go. You go.
Well, about the TikTok and the reaffirming, also, I know you're in touch with so many youth advocates too, who are really fighting the good fight also. And I know your movement is, I've learned from you. I've already learned so much from you also about promoting inclusion, because, yeah, because that's like really critical. And I think we do see it with the mobility paradigm shift. People that are really in it are typically talking about inclusion, because we can't have true walkability if it's not inclusive, you know. If you're
Mhm.
walking around a city, this is what I say, and you don't see people using wheelchairs, well, where are they? They
Right.
exist.
Right.
So the city is not accommodating for them. So
Mhm.
um,
Mhm.
you're really providing a lot of great great examples, a living example of also how to be inclusive in the movement, which is
Yeah.
so valuable. Thank you.
Oh my gosh. Well, and thank you. Like, we're learning from each other, my friend. And that's what I love about your collective and the correspondence network and the global perspectives. Like, it's such an important, it's such a wonderful space to be weaving and hearing from all the what other communities are either like doing well, but where are they like finding gaps, or what are they missing, or maybe they're starting to see car infrastructure come in, but they're trying to really organize before it does, because we're learning from each other. I mean, it's so cool to be connected to a network as well that's learning together. Because it is really, it's isolating as an advocate. Even like a lot of advocacy around some of this gets lumped into just kind of big multimodal buckets, and it's there's just an assumption that transit and biking and walking are all the same, and they're not. And so, because biking can get a lot more advocacy and funding, because just from a place of, and again, I love to bike. I even rent a car and I use a car once in a while. So none of the work that I'm doing with Pedestrian Dignity is anti car in and of itself, or anti bikes. It's just, but just the lack of like like grounded, unapologetic. First, there are human bodies moving by foot or on a wheelchair, navigating spaces. And until that's the center of the of what we actually see in our systems, like it's just we're just bypassing entire populations. But then I always add too, the harm of it's not just the harm of that, but it's also missing out on, and I kind of riff a lot of this in the book, but just missing out on these really inherent biological, physiological benefits, like of moving the way we're made to, understanding the neuroscience of what happens in the brain, what happens around creating new neural networks, what happens around central brain related to just stress and trauma and hardship, what happens to blood flow and joints and muscles and all the things that keep us upright, if you are moving in a bilateral way, but even on a wheelchair, like the posturing, the balancing to be moving through the world, and the vestibular system, like there's so much. Our connection to the earth and the planet and the rivers and the streams, and our accountability to habitats outside of man-made walls and spaces, like, and then I always talk about the relational quality of being shoulder to shoulder and side by side with the human population, and we're moving forward in a humble, unhurried way. Like there's something about that doesn't always have words or needs to be explained, but there's an energy and there's an exchange and there's a shared ecosystem where we're moving next to each other amidst all of our differences and disagreements, where we're sitting and resting at benches and sharing and watching kids play in fountains amongst all our differences and disagreements. And we're moving forward under a really big open sky. Like to have all of that as kind of a forecasted, here's what we're missing in our own capacity perhaps to evolve and emerge out of tension and difference. And so I attach so many things in my creative work to, it's not just like it's not just cussing because a sidewalk's missing, even though there is that. There's a world of benefit that I think gets lost sometimes, either in the fight or in when you don't have the spaces to actually curate like a healthy pedestrian ecosystem.
I love that, the world of benefit. I mean, that's such juicy stuff to talk about, because the mental health benefits, all the physical stuff you're talking about, the emotional, it's just incredible. That's a whole we'll have to do another recording on that, just on that.
It's a whole thing.
But I like what you said too, that people are missing out on that. And I have a question, and I wonder, first of all, do you think people know they're missing out? I see this just today. I was walking in the town, and it's it's a holiday starting here, and the traffic was just insane, and just like I was waiting for the bus. I was like, I'd rather be waiting for the bus than waiting in that traffic. You know what I mean? But do you think people know what they're missing out on? And also, I guess this partly may answer it in a way. You host these walk and roll events in which you do show people what they're missing, and specifically decision makers and people that are shaping policies and shaping space. So I'd love to hear a little bit about those walk and rolls.
Yeah, that's there's so many layers there. What I do love, and it's definitely all over the map, at least what I'm finding through some of the social media stuff, and just as I've been doing so much of this work, like, I've been hosting events, walking events. So after the cross country walk, I started an organization. At least it was a project at first. It became an organization, then it became a co-op. It was called Walk to Connect. And it's still a collective. There's an amazing community, but it was all about hosting connection focused walking, rolling experiences. And that was always dependent on the leaders and their interests. So sometimes they'd be art walks or history events, or they'd be walkability, dignity, safety audit type events, or they'd be meditative, contemplative, or they'd be cross-cultural or bilingual, or, we had all kinds of events going every single week. And so with all of that, there's, I would always, and with the social media, I'm always running into really like a pretty consistent frame of people. I had no idea that this was a thing, like whether it's Walk to Connect or Pedestrian Dignity, like that it's a thing, that it even could be a thing, but they make the connection based off of whether they, I know there's tons of assumptions made about Europe, but that's how a lot of people they'll just say like, well, I spent time walking around in Barcelona or in Paris, and then to come back and it was just shocking. And I never understood what that was, but then they make the connection when they see Walk to Connect or they see Pedestrian Dignity. They have a framework to kind of conceptualize it and from the lived, just like the lived experience. The other thing that I see a lot on the TikTok and Instagram is people who are either in currently or who have recently left college. And so they're leaving these college campuses, not having cars, and they're like, as they think about and watch the videos and experience what I'm putting out there, they make the direct connection that, oh yeah, no, I know this is why, this is a huge reason why I felt lighter. I felt more connected. I felt more like I had a community, because I had a space for 4 years or 2 years that allowed me to just freely kind of go out the door and be in a habitat, essentially. And so they make that connection, which is really, really cool. But then there's a lot of people, plenty of them, that are just coming in curious, trying to understand, trying to just from the vantage point of, oh, I observe so many people walking or taking the bus when I drive by, or when I, and they're making connections from the conceptual space first. And it's cool to see them get into the to replace some of their trips and hear what they're experiencing after they've thought about it a while, and then they're getting out. And so I think that connects to your question with the walking, rolling, transit experiences with decision makers. A lot of times, not all the time, but a lot of times, you think about anybody who's in political office, or anybody who's like maybe higher up in transportation departments, whether that's city or state or county, or whether they could be planners, they could be engineers, they could just be administrative directors, but people who are literally making decisions on millions of dollars that kind of comes through the pipes, whether it's federal or from different grants. And you would imagine, because a lot of those people are super, super busy, lots of meetings, lots of things, most of them are using cars, and yet given responsibility to discern funding that impacts pedestrians and other modes. And so the focus for years for me has just been to invite, curate, and tell stories that are lived, like really providing a lot of context, doing it in relationship with residents and people in the community who are living the specifics of whatever environment we're moving through. And very specifically having cross-department involvement on those events, if we can. Sometimes it doesn't work out that way, or sometimes I'm invited to host an event just with the department, but I really like to have cross departments, because as we get into the weeds of actually making changes, any one street or road or intersection has multiple agencies that have to sign off on, and or lobby for, and or advocate for, and or represent and maintain. And there's so much finger pointing, and it's not necessarily a malicious thing, and it's not malicious even to me, to them, but it's like there's so much actively separating the lived dignity of the pedestrian experience from those who make decisions on transportation as a whole. And so weaving the walking and rolling experiences so that it moves from the mind into the empathy realm, into the lived, like, oh, wow, I had no idea that this road that we've been managing, or I'm the senior engineer that's been managing this road for how many years, and I've never walked it here. And it's horrible. Like it's kind of, I always think about the yucca plant. Like there's a great writer, Dr. Howard Thurman. He talks about sometimes you need the yucca plant has these beautiful seed pods that come out that are just really big and beautiful and strong. And he's got this beautiful quote where it's just like, sometimes you need a storm. Like the yucca plants and a lot of plants that have seeds need a storm to shake out and break the seeds so that they fall and they go deeper, so that the plant can survive harsh conditions. Because if the seeds just fall and they're falling on the surface, the plant's not going to survive. So it knows that the storm is going to shake the seeds out to go deeper into the soil so the roots can go deeper. And I think about that a lot related to hosting some of these experiences, or with the Pedestrian Dignity Network. It's like, it's not just anger, it's not just ragey, shamey, it's just like, feel the harm of this so we can all help change it together. Like, and I feel that a lot, that the experiences help to shake shake the seed pods. So
Well,
that,
we
you
need
know,
that with the car dependencies, like really intense actually.
oh
And
my
I
God,
know I
so
was in
intense.
it for many years, and
Yes.
you really need. I mean, it's like the Matrix, pretty much. You know,
It
you need to
is.
be, you need to kind of be red pilled out of it. And given an opportunity, yeah, and given an
Uh,
opportunity
I need a
to,
whole blog on that, Annika. I
yeah,
need you to write. I want that written out. I love
yeah.
it.
Uh, and given the opportunity, well, first of all, to experience what good walkable, accessible,
Yes.
democratic environment, not walkability as like a, a feature. I know there's this concern. It's not a nice amenity, for
Right.
an up and coming neighborhood. It's not. It's a basic feature for
Yes.
a community anywhere on the planet. It's so basic. um,
Yes.
so I really love how you host these walk-in roles with decision makers, many of whom, as you say, are probably moving by car. And I think it's just a great blueprint for advocates all over the world. I want to do them,
Mhm.
and it could be the first time I see that you have people in wheelchairs. I have this idea of hosting such things, and yeah, making sure every person has an opportunity to either push the wheelchair or roll in it. Have parents with strollers, so that
Yeah.
everybody can experience what is this, to use the
Yeah.
local transit, to use the local pass as different movers.
Yeah.
That's probably the best way to bring the experience, and that's why I love what you do. You really bring it so down to earth and bring people into the experience. And
Yeah.
it's yeah, I'd love to. I'm going to do some, so I'll be looking to you for advice. Yeah.
Please. Yeah. And there, I'm really not trying to I'm not trying to be book selly. There's practices in this book that like kind of step by step offer
Oh,
some guidance on how to start thinking about, like how to start thinking about hosting those kinds of experiences.
okay, great.
And I always encourage, really encourage that it's in partnership with whether you're a resident and it's something specific to your patterns, and if not, if it's an area that you know of that's really harmful, then really like co-creating with the residents, because that way, because a lot of times, anybody in these decision making spaces, well, they're not going to write off, but they're gonna say, well, this person, Jonathon, pedestrian dignity, has an agenda,
Mm,
right? Like you're kind of the activist, the
right.
organizer, right or wrong. There's that category, but when
Yeah.
it's in partnership with people who live here, people who like grind every day to get
Mhm.
to or not get to the places they need to go. That's just, I think, from an inclusion standpoint, but also just from like a relational collective, like co-organizing those invitations. Oh, it's so powerful.
Mm. Yeah, co-creating with community. Well,
Yeah.
and maybe this is a good place to round off also, talking
Yeah.
about where you are. You're in Denver, right?
Yeah.
And
Hmm.
yeah, so talking a little bit, I don't know if you want to do one of the city walkability ratings.
Sure.
Why don't we do that? That could be kind of interesting. And then yeah, in doing that, sharing what your vision for improvements would be. I mean, I think anybody who's looking at pedestrian dignity, you are really highlighting the gaps in the built environment and in access. So your entire account, it's like the agencies really can just study what you're doing to learn
Totally.
how to improve.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Which is great. But so yeah, let's round off with a city walkability rating. Do you want to do biking too, include that walkability, transit, and cycling
Mm.
infrastructure?
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
I probably don't have the best biking framework, but I bike enough and move with bike lanes enough that I could definitely just, yeah, throw my
Okay.
opinion into the mix.
Okay, I'll let you decide what
Yeah.
you want to start with. That's a scale of 1 to 10, 1 lowest, 10 highest.
Uh-huh. I don't know if the I should preface a lot with, because I get asked this all the time on TikTok when I'm doing the lives and stuff. And I just want to add a little note. Anybody who's watching this, send me your videos and stories too. Like if you want to tag, like this is so much an account. I'm constantly sharing other people's stories as kind of an ethos of how to be a storyteller around both the positive and the harm. So just please be invited to share and send videos to me from your parts of the world. It could be such a cool way to connect Annika with the correspondent network. So I want to bring that up in our meeting.
I'll make a note of that too when I post it.
Yeah, I feel like that could just be really great. But so I always preface when I'm asked, like, hey, do you think Denver's like, what's it like walkability wise, or what are your 2 or 3 favorite most walkable cities in the US? And I get that question all the time, and I'm always prefacing it with like, well, my framework's a little different because I shouldn't even say that. That's not the right way of saying it. But I personally, like, my main filter for whether or not a city or a community is walkable is how are the arterial transit routes, the bus routes, the routes where so many people who have no choice but to be walking or taking the bus, how are those networks? Not necessarily the core downtowns, the core destinations, the kind of recreational parks. And so I really like filter. And so it always kind of, and especially in the US, that 1 to 10 kind of goes pretty quickly.
I know. I'm American.
So
I know.
You get it.
Yeah. You can do a bit. You can do 2 scores like for walkability downtown, but then because I'm aware as an American who's lived in many environments how subpar it is, even in many central areas. Right. So I'm very,
So okay, that I like that. We'll have 2 then, maybe 2. Okay, walkability downtown core. I would say compared to some other spaces and places I've been, I would say the downtown core is a 7. Yeah, I think I feel like just from what I've seen in other places, comparatively a 7, the downtown core. And then when I think about just from an arterial bus route framework, it's God, it's so bad. A 2. I'd put a 2. It's a Western sprawl city. Things are really spread out. Arterial state management of arterials is so harmful and high speed. We don't have any great networks. And Boulder and Fort Collins is much better, but Denver, woo. So I would say bikeability, probably a 6. I feel like there's more bike lanes coming. Not a lot of them are protected. They're mostly, it's mostly just paint. Some that are getting the plastic bollards, and some that are like, we're seeing more things in the downtown core that are showing up. But I still feel like from what it could be, a 6. I think it's better than most other places, but it's far from where it could be. And then from a transit perspective, yeah, I feel like I would say a 5. Just because we have transit, we have more transit than other places, but it is, to me, the frequency is really nowhere close to what it could be. Access to transit is nowhere what it could be. And I think just the public will around transit and funding and supporting transit is nowhere what it could be to help us have the systems that we need. We have stronger, I believe we have stronger east to west transit, but our north to south transit is limited. And anyway, so there's lots of, I think a 5 just kind of says, well, it's better than some other places, but it's so far from what it could be.
Well, how do you feel? I mean, you engage with agencies. You've engaged with agencies on a pretty regular basis. How do you feel looking forward, like about the understanding for the need for change? Is it just going so slowly, or is there some uptick in political will, public will?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's really hard because it's the thickness of car-centric, moving cars at the center, especially from the state side of things. And I think just from the public will is still so thick. It's so thick. So anything that feels positive still feels like crumbs, kind of just side projects, like here's some side money for some side things, which is fine. It's better than nothing. But to speak about that as positive still keeps the car at the center for me. So I just really am careful about, like, it's not like, not only is it not what it could be, we're in a crisis around human connection and human health and planetary resource care. And if we're not really getting to, so I don't have a lot of room personally, like to even celebrate some of the crumbs, even though that can feel and sound harsh to some of the agencies. That's why some of the agencies probably don't want to work together all that much, even though I want to stay open and I want to be collaborative. I'm really, really, really tired of how much is being lost and the costs of lives that are being lost, of all the things that we face, without really, really bold. And I think what's hard about this, to your question, is that I'm not seeing agencies or leaders even naming the harm, even though, like, realistically, to get sidewalks implemented at the level we need to get, I mean, this is years and years. I mean, this is long, slow work. I know that, but we don't even have vision statements and clarity and naming and owning and training and developing internal staff and training the public around, we understand, and this is where we're headed, and we are going to center. Like, there's none of that. It's more just pedestrians and bikes and transit live on the side. When we stack up community meetings, when we stack up surveys that go out to the communities, do we have questions that challenge car-centric cars on the street? Do we challenge cars at the level we challenge whether or not we want sidewalks or not, whether or not we want the bus route here and the frequency of the bus route? Do we also throw out the car to be sliced up into the whims of opinions? We don't. The car is still the assumed center. And so until that is actively changing, like, I think it's just going to take more calling out and calling in, like that creative, like, because I'd never want to be constantly just throwing fire, but I want to always be calling people in. But I think we just have a long way to go, my friend. It feels, to really kind of release that grip or the default, or be invited to really kind of take more ownership over decentering cars in the way that we need.
Yes,
it's a long answer.
It's a great answer. I'm gonna have to study it and listen to it a couple times because it's really heavy. It's super heavy. I'm glad you can laugh. We can laugh too, because it's again, I'm going to use the word absurd. It's so heavy, it's absurd, and that what we're up against. And thinking, as you said, we're in a crisis, human health wise, safety, the lives lost, planetary wise. I mean, is climate change gonna trigger public will, war? What's it gonna take? It kind of worries me about what it actually will take. And that worries me, actually. So, but maybe we can kind of end on this note, because I know both you and I, we're into creating awareness also with our spaces. And I know I've heard you say it too. You're not into car shaming. However, we have to decenter the car. We have to radically decenter the car. So it's this, to me, it's this like tightrope walk of not shaming people, because a lot of the ideas that are put forward for making places car free, they hurt people who actually have no other. A lot of people have no other alternative, right? We've created this system, and it's not always as actually the network, the Global Walkability Correspondence Network. I sometimes have people saying, I'd like to join your network, but I don't live in a walkable city. I can't walk. I said, that's exactly why you need to join. So people feel their own shame. Like, I can't represent walkability because I can't walk.
Absolutely.
Like, that's the weird twist. And I always tell people, we need people who are living in places where walking, it's not even really a safe option. And I've experienced that myself in places where I don't feel comfortable pushing my daughter in a stroller with the cars flying by and cars parked on sidewalks and all this crazy stuff. So maybe ending on this note, on all the work we have to do individually, collectively, and I think you and I both love to work in those ways, about this car dependence issue and the fact that many people don't get it. I didn't get it for many years of my life. with this really deep psychological heavy thing that humanity is in right now.
Big time.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I think that's where, you know, it's always you know, the always trying imperfectly, but like always trying that call in approach around like how to call us all in. And I think very intentionally, people who are driving cars for all the reasons, like having them in these spaces is so important, because there's a tension between I actually don't want to be, but I can't afford to live in the downtown area or the more walkable area, or, you know, and that's the harm of how much walkability has been commodified. Like, you know, you commodify, you make because something that is so intrinsic to human culture, design, movement, that feels really good, that is healthy and spacious, has become exclusive in a sense in the US. And so for all those complex reasons, and then who gets pushed out further into the suburbs because they can't afford to live in the downtown cores. And when you don't have transit moving with those increased populations at the frequency, you know, it's like, and so there are rightfully people who are like, I don't want to be driving every single trip. I don't want to be going, this is stressful and hard, but I can't afford to live anywhere else. And so, you know, that tension, which is so much why I'm never, it's like, this is not a car shaming account in that sense, but it is absolutely unapologetically calling out the harms of centering the personal automobile, and basically commodifying and creating a separation from the pedestrian experience that is so human and intrinsic. So yeah, so I think just this calling in for all of us, like all of our gifts, all of our skills. If you're a planner, if you're an engineer, if you're a city council member, if you're, I mean, anybody, like any skills, ideas. So we're all like leaning into just the kind of the honest, but just the honest like the break in kind of the human condition with self, with others, and with the planet. Like, let's just be honest about the break here. And how can we all, like, with all of our gifts and imperfections, like help repair the break. And what does that look like if you're in city government? What does it look like if you're an engineer inside of a firm? And what does it look like as an, you know, as an artist, kind of dancing and you know, running around on the outside sometimes? What does it look like as a student who's learning urban planning? What does it look like? I mean, what does it look like for all of us? Let's be honest about the break. Let's get into the weeds of it. And, you know, I really appreciate the book, Confessions of a Recovering Engineer, which is a great book. And there's a beautiful story at the beginning, and it's kind of capped at the end with like I think about being honest about the break is like, this was and still is an experiment. It's the car, that the personal automobile hasn't been around that long, and it's an experiment, and it's failing us. It's a failed experiment in and of itself. Doesn't mean the car itself is a failure, but the system that's been built around it, where now the car dictates to us what it needs. That's a failed experiment. Like there's a break. And so how do we care for each other? How do we care for each other and invite each other in, but really, I think get serious about it. Like let's move into some action. Let's take some risks. Let's do this.
Yeah, let's do this. Anybody listening who wants to connect, Jonathon at Pedestrian Dignity at Intrinsic Pass. When I upload this, I'll include contact information, and for people to, yes, connect with you, send videos of their pedestrian experiences.
Yeah.
And I look forward to more talks. I look forward to walking with you. I look forward to seeing your walks around your book launch, all of it. So thank you so much, Jonathon.
Annika, thank you for all that you do and all that you're weaving and I'm so grateful to be connected to how you are showing up in all of this collaboration. We need it so much. So honored and grateful, my friend. Thank you all.